But somebody who for over 30 years has been defending our rights under the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment to the Constitution is with us this evening. Larry Pratt was one of the founders of the Gun Owners of America. It now has over 300,000 members nationwide. It is dedicated to promoting the Second Amendment freedoms, to keep and bear arms, which have nothing to do with hunting or sport shooting and target shooting, as he pointed out to a reporter, and then got called on the carpet for it. He gave an, what was that? The publication? That Rolling Stone. Larry Pratt gave an interview to Rolling Stone magazine and made a comment that I must have made a couple of dozen times just in the last year, and which many of you have probably said. The Second Amendment is not about hunting, and it's not about sport shooting. It's about the empowerment of the individual in the face of government power. It is to establish a balance. That's what the Bill of Rights is all about. Larry Pratt made that observation, which to anybody in this room would be second nature. Rolling Stone magazine turned it into a major scandal. They said Larry Pratt is going to lead a national rebellion. And better yet, at least you think that people read it and turn the page, one Looney Tune member of the United States Congress named Carolyn Maloney, you know who she is? She is one of the most anti-Second Amendment members of the Congress. She called the Sergeant at Arms of the United States House of Representatives and the Capitol Police and said, "I have found a terrorist." He's quoted in Rolling Stone magazine. So, here he is. What, sheriffs? You know, spring into action. You got a terrorist in your midst. No, this is the way these people think. So, Larry Pratt has appeared. He's been on all kinds of television, from Good Morning America, The Today Show, Crossfire on CNN, Larry King Live, Sean Hannity's show on Fox News. He has debated everybody from Charlie Rangel, one of my favorites, to Al Gore, another one of my favorites. Did you ever notice how in the middle of winter, when it's like 10 degrees below, Al Gore disappears? You don't hear anything about that global warming stuff when it's 10 degrees below zero. Larry has also authored a book, Armed People Victorious. In 1990, he was the editor of a book called Safeguarding Liberty, the Constitution and the Militias. He is a historian. He is a political activist. He is one of the leaders of the national fight in favor of the Second Amendment and all of our rights in the Bill of Rights. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker of the evening, Larry Pratt.
Now we're back in business.
Well, you are a terrorist.
Just breaking things comes naturally. And, you know, to follow on that gracious introduction and the reference to New York, Representative Maloney, she was told that there was no articulable threat, so they weren't going to be able to help her out. But on the other hand, what if Ms. Maloney was actually imminently contemplating some tyrannical action? Then that could have been taken legitimately as an articulable threat. But of course, that's exactly what the Second Amendment is for. And that's, I think, what particularly irritated her. I said, this is, you know, we use our, ultimately, we have our firearms to protect ourselves from tyranny, particularly when it comes from the left. Well, she knew who I was speaking about. Anyway, typical thinking of the ruling class. And isn't it something that we've had some dust-ups with Brits who, in my mind, typify with their accent and sometimes their supercilious attitudes, the ruling class. Years ago, I was on a CNN International dust-up with a conservative parliamentarian who was so happy that his party had introduced what is now the gun control, virtually total gun ban in the United Kingdom. And I said, you know, what you're going to find is that your crime is going to go up. Your violent crime is going to go up once you have disarmed this many more of your fellow Brits. And his response was, I say, anybody that would say that over here would say he's quite flaky. I said, I know you would. That's why we're no longer British. So then I get another dose of it from Piers Morgan. And once again, a guy with a British accent telling us that we got our war for independence all wrong. Boy, that doesn't sell well. And Piers found that out. He had to finally admit in a column, an article in the Daily Mail in London, that he thought that he had lost his position at CNN because of the Second Amendment issue. I mean, he wouldn't let up. He had Ben Shapiro, he had Ted Nugent, he had all kinds of very articulate Second Amendment spokesmen, and they just kept batting him down. And so he allows us how maybe us Yanks really have a love affair with our guns, and his accent reminds us where we developed that love affair. So, anyway, there's a wannabe ruling class elder among us who I have affectionately dubbed Shotgun Joe. The vice president is very quick to give advice, particularly to the ladies.
Oh, yeah.
And you perhaps, especially this one, have seen at least one video where nasty guys, in my assumption, gave their lady friends a shotgun without properly preparing them for what these things can do to you. And so, boom, the first gal goes down on her back, and the next one goes down on her back, and the next one, gun goes flying out of her hands. And there's about 4 or 5 of those kinds of episodes. And then at the end of it, there's a gal nicely equipped with all the proper attire with an AR-15, obviously controlled fire at a series of targets. And so I know somebody that personally pointed that out to the vice president, and the next day he was saying the same nonsense. So he has a fact-free head. And that's our vice president. Really, really inspirational. And then it goes from kind of funny, such as the vice president, to rather concerning when you hear Janet Napolitano identify who the terrorists are. Not Muslims, not the mafia, not a whole string of likely candidates, but everybody in this room, pro-lifers. Pro-lifers set a lot of bombs off too, I guess. It's just, the ruling class has a contempt and a fear, and I'm glad about the fear, but the contempt really shouldn't show so plainly, because I think they're going to find out that the display of that contempt is going to come back on them pretty hard this year, I'm hoping. I'm hoping that the Republicans will start messaging something more than, I ain't a Democrat. That's good, that's a good start, but what else are you going to do about that? What is your vision for the future? Do you have a desire to return us to a limited government, free society that can enable a productive economy? I don't hear that coming from the leadership of the Republican Party. I hear it coming from a number of elected Republicans in Congress and in other places, but not from the leadership of the Republican Party. And hopefully we're going to find a way in the next, not even 2 months now, to have enough of a combined effort where conservatives and Republicans are talking about what we need to do to regain a proper ordering of government in this country and a return to constitutional government. Don't see that happening yet, although there are a number that are certainly attempting it, and every time they get on in front of a camera or a microphone, they seem to do very well. So we'll see if that catches on. We can hope. And you can certainly encourage the candidates with whom you have contact. One of the things that is before the Congress, has been before the Congress off and on for some time, is the National Carry Recognition Law. This is not reciprocity. Recognition means that if you manage to crawl over enough glass and get a concealed carry permit, say here in New York State, that it would be recognized anywhere in the country. San Francisco, Chicago, they might have heartburn, but they couldn't keep you. Because it's the same with your driver's license. Once you get that New York driver's license, you don't have to stop and take an exam when you go into Pennsylvania. And so that's what we're talking about with this measure that Senator Thune has carried a number of times. And that's probably been one of our biggest proactive pushes. But you all probably are quite aware that there was a major battle fought last year following the Sandy Hook shooting. And Senator Toomey, and I have to repent, I campaigned for him as a representative. He voted very well, and he got into the Senate, and he didn't vote so well. And Senator Manchin was the guy that had this really remarkable campaign ad where he took the Obamacare bill that he was campaigning against, hung a copy of it, multi-page, 2,000-page bill, from a tree limb, and then aimed at it and got it with his rifle. Well, I've already in my mind written the ad when he runs for re-election. It's going to be Manchin Campaign Promises. It was such a graphic ad that he ran that I think many people probably will make the association. And if a focus group indicates that they don't, then maybe we'll just run a little bit of his ad, and then we'll run our ad. But I'm waiting for him. And that will be the way I demonstrate that I really have repented from having supported him. He broke faith, and that, to me, is a serious matter. His measure would have topped off the way a national gun registry is being illegally compiled by the federal government. Now, I realize they will tell you that, well, the law says they have to destroy the records after 24 hours of the background check being done. Well, we know that when they commission longitudinal studies for social scientists to examine that behavior, they didn't exactly get rid of it in 24 hours. And after the NSA scandal and the IRS scandal, does anybody really believe they're not breaking the law on this one? This is what too many in government have wanted to get their hands on. They want to know where those guns are so bad because we do frighten them. And they want to take away that fear by taking away our guns. So we fought that tooth and nail. We pointed out the problems that were present in that bill. And about the end of March, I guess, we saw the vote was looming, and we put out an email to those on our email alert list that if you're an NRA member, please call this guy at this number at the NRA and ask him to urge the leadership of the organization to publicly oppose. See, we were beginning to pick up rumors, both in the media and from people up on the Hill that were saying to us, they haven't said anything publicly, but they're up here working for the Toomey Manchin bill. Wow. So we put out this alert, and a week later, the thing was turned around. They actually said that they were going to score it as an anti-gun vote. We thought, mission accomplished. What happened next was very surprising because we weren't really sure how much they had been into this bill. Manchin went running to the media and cried, "I've been betrayed. They've done a 180 on me. We had this in the bag, and now they've done this." So if you get our email alerts and you act upon them, yes, they have impact. They made all the difference in that battle. I am convinced that it was that email list, which, by the way, we have affectionately dubbed the Piers Morgan Memorial email list. Because it grew enormously after his polite treatment of yours truly on his show, Jeeves the Butler, was so outrageous that I think it really helped turn the whole thing. Piers Morgan probably has little idea, and nor am I eager to tell him what a major contribution he made. He crashed our server 3 times. People couldn't get on our list fast enough. And so when the battle occurred shortly after, we had a whole lot bigger a gun to fight with than we had going in. So, Piers Morgan, we salute you. There's something that struck us at the time of the Benghazi tragedy, and that is that liberals on some points are quite consistent. They really don't believe in self-defense. It's provocative. It's just going to make the situation worse. And besides, some of them I think almost are animus. They think that gun is going to make you go crazy. And so here we have a withdrawing of the military assets to protect the Benghazi mission location, and followed within just a handful of weeks the attack. The terrorists saw what was happening, and that was their opportunity to strike, and they took it, and we gave it to them, and that was Hillary Clinton. So I'm kind of hoping she does run for president, because I'm going to be waiting for her right after we get finished with Mr. Toomey. You know, Fast and Furious was intended, and we know this from documents that were submitted into the congressional record, memoranda from within the ATF and the Justice Department. It was intended to stick it to gun owners, and particularly to stores, so that they could hammer these stores. And they went ahead and did it anyway, because they tightened restrictions on the southwest border states as a result of it. These people have no shame. They are willing to get people murdered in order to accomplish a policy objective. Melson, the then head of the ATF, would get weekly violent crime reports from our Mexican border, and when he saw the increase in murders carried out in that recent period, there were times when he would say, good that people are getting murdered, and that you facilitated it. And none of them are in jail, of course, because Eric Holder was part of that whole operation. But the shame is that the Republicans haven't brought his sorry self over to the House of Representatives and put him on trial. He has been accused, if you will, he's been impeached on a criminal contempt citation. It's been sent to the D.C. federal court, where for nearly 2 years, nothing has happened. Now, if there were a real willingness to deal with this kind of horrible situation, the House was given by the founders the tools to do it. Cut the money from that court until they docket the Holder conviction from the House. And until they're willing to do that, there's plenty of shelters in the area. Go ahead and use one of those, folks, because we're not contributing to your salary anymore until then. That, I think, is one of the great indictments, if you will, against John Boehner. In fact, when I think of John Boehner, it occurs to me that the zoologists, actually thinking of him, have come up with a new phylum. It's called Johannes Boehnerus. It's a creature that walks upright, but it has no backbone. I had a chance to attend a meeting as we were heading into the time of the vote for the debt limit, which resulted in the president shutting down some of the government, which, again, the Republicans hardly ever articulated who was doing the shutting. They don't shut anything down. They legislate money. The executive makes the decision on what doors, if any, to close. And you never heard them talking about that. They ran away from it like a little baby being intimidated by a bully. These are our guys. Anyway, at a meeting that was hosted by Senator Lee in his conference room, there were a number of folks like yours truly heading up groups that had all one thing in common, all different kinds of issues, but one thing in common. We had all been opposed for one reason or another to Obamacare. In our case, it was the invasion of privacy that was going to make even worse the anti-gun powers of this administration. The misuse of psychiatric diagnoses. So that, for instance, PTSD, they would love to slap that around and use that as a predicate for taking folks' guns away. Well, I've known a couple of soldiers that had PTSD. They got over it. The worst that this one guy would do was in the middle of the night, he'd have I guess you'd call it a panic attack. He would get up, grab his .45, and clear the room. Well, he never shot anybody because there wasn't anybody to shoot, wasn't anybody threatening, and he got over it. And that's probably one of the more serious cases of PTSD that I think I've heard about. And for that, we're going to be taking guys' guns away and gals. That's over the top, but that's where they would be going if we hadn't called them out on this. And they're still expanding the database of those that they send from, say, the VA. They started with veterans, and they began under Bush, sending names from the VA over to the NIC system, to the instant check system. And now our dear leader has expanded that to everybody that he can get his hands on a medical record. Well, how would he get his hands on medical records of people that hadn't been involved in the government that he controlled? Well, obviously, zero care, as I affectionately call it. That's how they are grabbing more and more records of more and more gun owners so that they can use them. And we had calls from people during the Veterans Disarmament Act battle under Bush. Guys saying, I went to renew my carry permit and I was denied. And within a couple of weeks, ATF's knocking on my door to grab my guns. So it's not a made-up problem. It's real. It's happened. Continues to happen. We've got to put an end to zero care for so many different reasons. But the Second Amendment is suffering as well as some of the others. Now, sheriffs in our country, we've heard about the really excellent service that the honorees have given. And I want to tell a couple of stories about some sheriffs, because I've had the opportunity to go to sheriffs' meetings, the Constitutional Peace Officers and Sheriffs Association, for your support. And one of them is now a life member of Gun Owners of America, Brad Rogers, Sheriff of Elkhart County, Indiana. He was approached by a farmer in his substantially rural district, although Elkhart is also a city of about 100,000, so about half the county. And the farmer said, the FDA is just on a toot about raw milk. And even though they can't point to any problems, they know that it's not good for you and they don't want you to make it. And so they've inspected me till I'm cross-eyed, and now they've got me in federal court, and I'm very concerned that they're going to grab my equipment and bankrupt me. Rogers went out to do some due diligence, looked at the farm, came back satisfied, and sent an email to the head attorney at the FDA and told her, if you all put another foot on this farmer's property, I'm arresting you. And she wrote back and said, well, if you try that, we'll arrest you. And this was about 2.5 years ago now. Sheriff Rogers said, game on. Well, the game hasn't started yet. They haven't come. Because a sheriff of that mentality who campaigns rather openly that this is his view of the federal government, that they only have certain very enumerated and limited powers, and when they try to go beyond that in his county, his election pledge was, I'm going to interpose myself. He has done it, and it has worked. And the that Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, every meeting they've had is a report, if you will, from various sheriffs who have done similar things on different issues. Benny House is the sheriff of Otero County, New Mexico, and he told the Forest Service he'd do what Brad Rogers would do to him if they arrested any of his citizens who were going into national forests to drag out deadwood. First of all, it makes good firewood, and secondly, because it makes such good firewood, if you leave it there in the forest and a fire gets started, woof, it's like gasoline being left in the forest. And they made the same threats, and House responded similarly to Brad Rogers. And because they kept clearing the forest around the village of Cloudcroft, which is sitting right atop the mountain, the Rockies, it's a ski village, the fire was nearby, but it was contained because they had violated Forest Service policy. There's an example in the, well, not, you know, you've got your pockets of sanity in New York State, and they've got some in Maryland as well, Carroll County being one of them. And Richard Rothschild is one of the commissioners of the county who led in introducing and getting enacted a kind of interposition resolution telling the feds that they better not come in for anybody's guns in their county. And of course the sheriff was very supportive of that. So I guess one of the things you can take away from this is when you're deciding where to move, you better look into these kinds of politics. Are you going to be protected by your sheriff, or is he going to become part of the problem? And the fact that you have sheriffs like this, like these folks here, around the country means that there's probably well over 400 who have signed on to the CSPOA notion that interposition is an important thing. And it's really the sheriff who's at the point of the spear. If he's willing to do that, then the feds have heretofore backed down. You're, I'm sure, familiar with the Bundy Ranch standoff with the BLM. Well, about 15 years before, the Hage family, the Wayne Hage family, same county, had the same kind of problem, but that time, then Sheriff Vinnie DeMaio told the feds what Brad Rogers said, what Benny House said, and what so many other sheriffs have said, and they actually had an armed standoff, and kind of like the Bundy Ranch, and finally the feds realized that maybe this wasn't the day to die. And so they backed off. And they left people in the county alone for, well, until they tried it again with Bundy. So you can push them back, but until we stop sending them elected officials who send them our money, until we can get these people working in the private sector instead of in the BLM or whatever, you know, alphabet agency you want, we're going to continue to have to fight these battles time after time after time. And so the sheriff continues to be, in this environment, I think, one of the key bastions of the liberties that we have written down on paper that really come to us from God. And it's something that we better be zealous about. And your being here tonight tells me you're zealous, but we need to do a lot of recruiting. We need to be telling this story to as many people as possible and get them enlisted. Got to get them excited about the fact that we can take our government back again. It has been done in counties all across the country, and we can continue to do that and make this an increasing movement, a spreading movement. We don't have to depend on Johannes Boehnerus to defend our liberty. We can do it at the local level. We can do it at the state level. State of Kansas has interpositioned the whole state in terms of gun control moves by the federal government. And in the state of Wyoming, they've got a law, the Wyoming Firearms Act, which says that if you make a gun in Wyoming and you sell it in Wyoming for the purpose of it staying in Wyoming, then no serial numbers are needed, no compliance with any federal law is needed. And the kicker is I mean, that's pretty good right there, if it just stopped there. But the kicker is that it's going to be a penalty, a crime, if a federal official were to come into that county, into the state of Wyoming, and try to enforce federal law in contravention of the state law. Now, if you ever get around to trying a law like that here, the only criticism I have of the Wyoming Act is it put the penalty at 365 days max. And I asked the guy that got it through the legislature why 365 instead of 366, because we had that one more day under federal law. If you're convicted of a crime that could, even if it doesn't, put you in jail for 366 days, your firearms freedoms are toast. And so a federal agent has to consider whether he wants to continue working with a gun. Because if he's convicted under the Wyoming Act plus 1 day, he's no longer an armed federal agent. He might be a federal agent, but not an armed one. So these are some of the hopefully somewhat creative approaches that are available to us at the federal and at the state and local level. And I'm encouraged that you all have not given up, that you're in a difficult political environment. I understand what the state of New York is like in totality, but you've got a base here, and I just hope that you will continue to use it and to move out from it and to increase your number in other parts of the state, because you've got a message that I think is a good one, and be proud of it, and keep doing what you've been doing. Thanks so much.